Hello, and welcome to the So You Want to Be a Marine Biologist podcast, where we learn about the ocean, share sea stories, and explore ocean careers. I'm your host, Kara Muzia. Let's dive into today's episode. This episode is brought to you by you. Thank you to those of you who have become patrons of the So You Want to Be a Marine Biologist podcast. For less than the cost of a dive tank refill, or a cup of coffee, you can help keep the podcast episodes coming. There's also some fun bonuses for patrons, so be sure to check those out at patreon.com/marinebio.life. That's patreon.com/marinebio.life. Hello, mermaids, pirates, ocean lovers, and land lovers. Welcome to today's show. Question: what do you do with a blue whale? You cheer it up. What is the killer whale's favorite music? Anything from an orchestra. My guest today is marine mammal ecologist Denise Risch. Denise studies sound underwater, and if this sounds like a quiet activity to you, today's episode is a must listen. I learned so much about what's going on in the not-so-silent world below the surface of the sea. Denise's work has included mammals such as bearded seals, dolphins, and orcas, and her research has carried her from Germany to the States and ultimately to Scotland, where she is currently conducting research with the Scottish Association for Marine Science. Her work encompasses so much, including analyzing impacts of cutting-edge renewable energy technology, like wind farms and tidal energy, on the marine environment. We chat about how underwater acoustics or underwater sounds are recorded, how COVID has impacted our oceans, and how we can all become involved in marine acoustics. Please enjoy. Denise, welcome to the So You Want to Be a Marine Biologist podcast. I'm really excited to chat with you today.
Hello.
So I want to start by breaking down, you study acoustics in the ocean, which is so interesting because people think that the ocean is silent, right? You submerge underwater and it's quiet, except in the ocean, it's really not. So could you explain a little bit about what it is that you do and what acoustics is?
Yeah, it's an interesting point you're making there. And I'm actually often, when I'm giving talk about the work that I'm doing, I often start off by showing a slide or a quote really from Jacques Cousteau, who's I think is responsible why people think that the ocean is quiet, because his original movie from the 60s was called, I don't remember.
The Silent World.
The silent world, anyway, translated. Yeah, and it really isn't. So as soon as you put a hydrophone or an underwater microphone into the water, or even if you just dive down, you can hear that there's lots of sounds in the ocean. And there's different types of sounds. So there are the sounds that are created by the environment. So if you think of a big storm, waves hitting the shore, all of that creates noise underwater or sound underwater, really, that's present. And then the different animals that live in the sea are producing sound. And sound is really important to their lives because light doesn't really penetrate more than a couple of meters into the water. And so most species that live in the ocean actually use sound as the main channel of communication. So if you think of us as being visual animals, most animals in the ocean are actually animals that use sound as their main form of finding food, finding mates, and detecting predators. So it's really important for animals to function in the ocean, and that's why we are studying it. We are also on and in the ocean, so there's a whole suite of human underwater sound that is being produced, for example, by ships. Exploration for oil and gas. The military is using powerful sonars that can be heard over far ranges, or construction work. If you think of offshore wind farms that are being built in many places around the world at the moment, all those activities that we are conducting underwater produce noise that might impact animals and what they are trying to achieve, which which is communicating with one another or detecting predators. And so that's really what I'm studying. The underwater sounds that the animals, and in my case, I'm focusing on marine mammals, are producing, and also the sounds that we as humans produce and how they might impact marine mammals. That's kind of the focus of my studies.
Very cool. Yeah, it's so interesting. Just, acoustics is sounds and soundscapes underwater. And yeah, like you mentioned, Jacques Cousteau did kind of coin that like phrase of the silent world. And, if you are in like a swimming pool and you put your hand out under the water, it is very silent, but there's nothing living in the swimming pool. You go into the ocean, and even if you're just at the beach, you can hear all sorts of clicks and pops. If there's a boat that goes by, it sounds a lot closer underwater than it really is. It's amazing to just kind of hear all these different sounds under the sea.
Yeah, exactly. Our ears also adapted to hearing in airs and not underwater. So even though we can hear underwater, everything sounds a little bit muffled. But of course, the animals that live in the ocean, they're adapted to using sounds underwater and perceiving them. So they are much better in using sounds and hearing them underwater than we are.
Yeah. So that was something I was thinking about earlier. We hear in a certain range, right? Are there sounds underwater that are like well outside of our own ranges?
Yeah, they definitely are. So as humans, we can hear from about 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. That's the frequency range or the pitch of the sounds that we can hear. There's the sounds that are below that range we call infrasound. So those are the very low sounds that are used by fin and blue whales, for example. They have parts of their repertoire that we as humans wouldn't be able to hear unless we take the recording of them and modify it to make it audible to us. And then there is the high frequency sound, which is the ultrasound that a lot of the dolphin and porpoise species are using. So they are in the 100 kilohertz range that is inaudible to us. The high frequency clicks by porpoises, for example, they are in that range. Yeah. So it's a broad band, and similarly with sounds that are produced by human activities, some of them can be lower than or higher than what we can hear. So some of the echo sounders that we are using to find fish, for example, might not be audible to humans, but can be audible to a range of different species.
Yeah, that is so fascinating. So how did you get into acoustics?
So it's a little bit of a winded path.
As it always is.
As it always is. I've been fascinated by marine mammals for a long time. So from when I was a child, and probably starting with Jacques Cousteau's movies, actually, because I grew up in Berlin, very, very far from the ocean, so didn't have that much exposure growing up, but except for documentaries and visiting the seas during holidays. When I discovered that interest, I started volunteering for an NGO that worked on the German North Sea coast, watching porpoises. That was really my interest. Was the start of me when I was about 14, 15 years old, learning about porpoises in the North Sea. And then just after I finished high school, I took on an internship at a research station in Canada, north of Vancouver Island. The station is called the Orca Lab, and it's a really small place on an island just north of Vancouver Island, where Paul Spong and Helena Simons have established that research station a few decades ago now, and that's where I went to volunteer and help them study the orca populations that frequent that area in the summer. And they basically live on this remote island, and around that island they have a network of underwater microphones installed in order to follow the whales as they come into their area and basically study them passively without having to go out and sort of be around them all the time. So it's a really good way to learn about these whales and follow them, but not interfering with them. So that was really my first research project when I was 19, 20 years old. And that was just fascinating to be in that place, to be immersed 24 hours into the acoustic world of orcas, their different dialects, and just to learn about their sounds. And that's really how it all started. I just wanted to know much more afterwards, and I went from there.
Amazing. What brought you out to Vancouver Island in the first place? I mean, it sounds like when you got there, the project that you were working on was guaranteed to be the acoustics one, and that's kind of what drew you there. But what inspired you to even make that leap? You just knew you wanted to work with marine mammals, and this opportunity presented itself?
Yeah, it was just I knew, as I said, so I started helping to study porpoises on the North Sea, which was close to home. And after that experience, I wanted to learn more about marine mammals. So I was looking for projects that I found interesting and that would take volunteers. So I wrote a whole bunch of letters to several projects worldwide to see whether they would take on summer students or volunteers. That was before I went to start university. So there weren't that many places that would take on someone with absolutely no experience or not being a student yet, but Orca Lab wrote back and offered me that opportunity to come out, so that's what I did.
Yeah.
So it wasn't necessarily, I didn't know at the time that I would study acoustics, and I didn't know very much about the place except that they were studying orcas, and so being there and helping with the work they are carrying out at that research station, I got exposed to the underwater world, the acoustic world.
Very cool. I have a special spot for orcas. I watched Free Willy growing up. So it would be such a surreal experience. And Vancouver is beautiful. I mean, that area of the world is just like absolutely stunning. So it just seems like such an idyllic location to study these animals. Did you see orcas often, or were you just kind of studying their acoustics or their soundscapes?
No, it definitely is. It's a very unique place. And of course, for someone coming from Berlin, coming from a big city, it was the first time for me to be really in the wilderness of British Columbia. It's a beautiful place. And the area where this research station is based is called Johnston Strait. So the station is on a small island, and the whales are passing by it. So you do get to see them. It's a very good place to observe orcas from shore. But with the network of acoustic stations that they have, and nowadays they also have a network of underwater cameras that actually live stream to the internet. So people can go on orcalife.com is the website where you can basically listen and watch the whales underwater and above water 24 hours a day. Yeah, so you get to see them, but because sound travels so well underwater, and with this network of microphones, we were able to follow the whales even when they were out of range or out of visual range for us to see them. We could still hear them. And the fascinating thing about orcas is that so they live in family groups, and each family group has their own dialect that you can distinguish. Even we can hear the differences. So you basically can follow the different groups as they come into the area and socialize and hunt and meet up with one another. You can hear that and you can follow them. Really, really fascinating, and a really unique view into their world.
Yeah.
And of course, you also hear ships going past, and you hear how the whales react to them, and so on. So it was a really nice introduction to underwater acoustics.
Yeah, that is so cool. So what were the reactions to the ships?
So often cruise ships would pass through the area, and I remember hearing those, just being really, you see the big ships, but you really need to listen to them to really understand what their impact is on marine mammals. And so I still really vividly remember to hearing the silence and the whales, and then the ships coming in, and how they just take over as they get closer and closer to the microphones that we were listening through. And so very often the whales would just become silent and just wait until the ships have moved on, and then they would start vocalizing again. So that's something that we often observe.
Yeah, that makes sense. So they're, it's a quiet, relatively quiet world, right? And then they're in there chattering. They're probably one of the loudest thing. And then you have this massive ship making just big motor noises coming through and disturbing the soundscape. And so instead of talking over it, even if they could, they just kind of shut down until the ship is passed, and then they start chattering again. That's really interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so not necessarily, and they didn't necessarily always do that, but quite often that was one reaction that they would show, that they would just become quiet and then start up again later on.
You've studied porpoises and you've studied orcas, which is so cool. And you've also studied bearded seals. What was it like studying bearded seals?
Hey, Kara here. I hear it all the time. How do I become a marine biologist? Or my niece wants to help the ocean. Where does she even start? I hear from students, yes, and also nurses, HR professionals, and other mid-career folks who wonder if they could still make their dream of working with sea turtles or sharks come true, wondering if it's too late to answer the ocean's call. Here's what I've learned after 20 years in the field and hundreds of interviews. There's no straight line, no magic degree, and no gatekeeper. You create the path forward. If this sounds overwhelming and vague, I've created 2 tools to help you stop wondering what if and start moving forward with clarity and purpose. The first is my free guide, Be a Marine Biologist Without the Degree. Over 1,000 people have already downloaded this guide and taken their first step towards ocean impact. Inside, you'll find 7 concrete, doable actions to help you get started, whether you're just exploring or ready to make a change. Then there's the Ocean Blueprint. This is a 30-day self-paced course that helps you build your unique path into ocean science and conservation without quitting your job or going back to school. Inside the Ocean Blueprint, you'll get daily prompts to explore your interests, skills, and next steps, a structure that turns overwhelm into real momentum, and a bonus section to root your work into ocean connection. You don't have to wait for a degree, a perfect plan, or permission. Whether you're wading in or ready to take the deep dive, these tools are here to help you move from dreaming to doing. The ocean called. Are you ready to answer? Links in the show notes and on my website, karagracemuzia.com. I can't wait to see the waves you'll make.
Yeah, so bearded seals, so that was my master's project. So I went, after this experience at Orca Lab, I went on and studied biology, and for my master's, I went to Tromsø in Norway, right on the top of Norway, and my supervisor there, Sophie van Paris, she was studying bearded seals, which is an Arctic seal species. They live around the Arctic. She was studying them in Svalbard, and so she had some recordings that I was using for my research. And what I was doing was to compare the different dialects. So I had recordings from Svalbard, and I had recordings that were collected in Alaska and in Arctic Canada. And I was comparing those sets of recordings to see whether we could acoustically define populations of seals, so whether they would sound different and how that then compared to their genetic difference. I didn't do any genetic analysis, I just did the acoustic part, but that was the aim of this research, was to see how different acoustically they would be. And bearded seals are fascinating. So it's mostly the males producing these trills that can be up to a minute long. So they produce them during the breeding season in the Arctic to attract females and to defend their territories. And a fascinating underwater sound that they produce.
Yeah.
Which doesn't necessarily sound like a seal. I can maybe send you a recording of a bearded seal. That's really a beautiful, haunting trill that they're producing.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I'd love to hear it. That's really cool. So I want to back up 1 second. So when you were out in Vancouver at Orca Island, you didn't have any degrees yet. You didn't have any experience, and this kind of prompted you to follow this passion of yours and go to university and study this. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's really amazing. Something I preach a lot about on the podcast. If you're interested in starting a career in marine science, wherever you are, whether you're fresh out of high school or if you're a little bit further along in your life, is that getting experience is so important because it kind of shows you what you do and don't like and kind of some different options. And I think people just get stuck and they think that they need to go to university right away. And your story, I mean, I'm sure it wasn't easy getting this orca experience because, like you mentioned, there wasn't a lot of people or a lot of organizations that were willing to take on somebody that didn't have the degrees, but you did find it and you did persevere and you had this really amazing experience that ultimately ended up shaping your entire career.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Even the experience before studying porpoises on the North Sea, this was just a very small project that had been set up by a teacher who lived there and who was very passionate in taking on younger students, and high school students to show them porpoise research. And that's quite unique. But I would definitely agree at trying to seek out opportunities like that. You might have to write quite a few letters and you won't always get a response, but the experience that you get from such projects and the connections and relationships that you form during that field work, if that's a possibility for you, that's something that I would definitely recommend doing, because as you say, you do learn what you like, what you don't like, and creates opportunities and allows you to find your own path.
Yeah, very cool. Something that occurred to me while we were chatting about this trill of these bearded seals is this trill like in our range or not, like the human hearing range?
Yeah, so those trills we can hear. They are completely in our frequency range. Like a lot of sounds that marine mammals produce, we can hear them. We can hear the calls of orcas, of dolphins, some of the fish species. Some of them we can hear. Some of them might be kind of on the lower edge of our hearing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And also invertebrates, sea urchins grazing or, snapping shrimps. There's a lot of different species that are producing sounds.
Mm-hmm. How do you measure the sounds and identify them, I guess, the sounds that are outside of our hearing range? Like you mentioned, there's a couple species of whales that are outside of our range.
Yeah, so what we typically do is, so I mentioned underwater microphones or hydrophones, as they are also called.
Yeah.
Those instruments are what we put out into the ocean, sometimes for long periods. Some of them we can deploy for a year or up to 2 years in very remote regions. Others we just deploy for a couple of weeks. It really depends on the project. And those instruments collect the data for us, and then we bring them back into the lab and we download them to our computers. And then there's specialized software that we use to make the sounds visible. So we're creating what we call spectrograms. It's basically a visualization of sounds which shows you the time versus the frequency or the pitch of the signal and how loud they are as a colored picture, really, because we are really visual animals, as I mentioned before. So we are really good at recognizing pattern with our eyes, and so we're using these spectrograms to identify patterns and can measure duration and the pitch and the loudness of these sounds using these programs. And then also a lot of listening and more nowadays, because we are collecting a lot of data, as you can imagine. If you record for a year or longer, Orca Lab, the project that I mentioned, has been studying those orcas for the last 30 years. So they have a huge archive of acoustic recordings, all the way, starting with recording on tape desks and now, digitally. So more and more we are using automated processing, and artificial intelligence and machine learning approaches are really starting to help us a lot in analyzing the sounds that we are getting back.
Yeah, that makes sense. Otherwise, before artificial intelligence and machine learning, it's probably you sitting with headphones on, studying these spectrograms and listening. Well, I guess you don't have headphones on and study the spectrograms, but you're like watching these printouts and like trying to decide what's what.
Yeah, so it used to be before I started in the field, that's what people did here. So they created those spectrograms and they were printing them out and described and discovered the patterns. Humpback whale song, for example, that we all know now, that's how the first discoveries were made. Now we are using computers, but as you say, it's very time consuming if you sit there and you listen and you detect sounds manually and mark them out to measure them. That takes a very long time. So maybe 3 or 4 times real time you need to analyze a tape of recordings. So that's obviously, if you have so much data,
right,
that's not really feasible anymore. So then you really need automated methods, automated detectors and classifiers. And we're getting better and better at it. But there's a lot of work to do as well.
Yeah. Yes. Speaking of a lot of work, you've published 6 papers just in 2021, which I was kind of blown away when I started tallying that up. Well, that's 6 papers that I found online. There might be more. I'm impressed by this. But I wanted to chat about some of your research. And I think this whole underwater acoustics is just absolutely incredible because it really lends a better picture of what's happening. It's really hard to visually see animals and to track them. And so acoustics, because sound travels so far underwater, is such a really valuable way to research animals. One of the things that really struck me that was kind of relevant here, you did a study in a cold water coral reef and evaluating the effects of noise pollution in relationship to COVID. Could you explain a little bit about what that study was? And just on the time frame, it doesn't seem like it was a totally intentional thing that you were trying to measure the impacts of sound and COVID, but it was a happy accident.
Yeah, you can definitely call it that. So this is a study that was actually where I was a co-author. So it's really my colleague Laurence de Clippelet from Edinburgh University. She is the lead on this research and was the one collecting the data, which we then wrote up together. So the intention was, before COVID, we started talking. Laurence has been studying coral reefs for a number of years, and she was interested to listen to them. There's a lot of research on coral reefs in more tropical areas and the different fish species and crustaceans and what sounds they make and how sound is important for the larvae to orientate themselves and find the reefs. So there's a body of work that already exists, but there's not that much work that has been done in cold water environments. And so that was the aim of the study that Laurence set up in Sweden. And she went and put 2 of our acoustic recorders down just before lockdown, really. I think it was in February that she was in Sweden. She came back and then lockdown started. So this was really a coincidence that we then had acoustic recordings from right after lockdown. And the coral reef that she was looking at was situated right under the ferry lane between Sweden and Norway.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, especially in the beginning of lockdown, there was a sudden stop of traffic. And so we had this unique data set when she eventually got to go back in last summer and to retrieve the recorders. We had this data set of very much reduced noise because the ferries weren't going as frequently as they normally would. And then later on, when everything started up again, the kind of more normal soundscape with all the boats and the ferries passing over our recorders. So we were able to compare before and after, and that's what that study was about, showing the reduction of noise level just by not having the ferries going back and forth every day.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you're able to capture that.
Yeah. So there's quite a few people who did this, similar types of studies, obviously all over the world last year, because if we study the impact of noise on marine species, we have the soundscape as it is now, but what we are often missing is the baseline, what would it be without noise or human-made noise in many coastal areas, especially. We always have ships present, so you can only guess what it would be like if there wasn't this constant traffic noise. So this was really, the silence was a really unique opportunity to study but what the difference would be if all the traffic, whether it's ships or cars in a terrestrial environment, wouldn't be there, and how animals would react to that.
Yeah. This kind of leads really nicely into, you had a paper published really early this year, and the title is Current Knowledge Already Justifies Underwater Noise Reduction. Could you explain a little bit about, what the study was and kind of what your paper is talking about?
So that was really not really a study. It was more a response letter or an opinion piece that me and some colleagues wrote, really just trying to highlight the importance of using the precautionary principle when we think about underwater noise and think about managing it or managing the noise that we are putting into the ocean. For example, if you're planning a new construction project. As you can imagine, studying marine species is difficult. They're hidden from our view. We don't have easy access to most of them. And to really understand how a particular noise source that we are putting into the ocean impact the animals that live in an area, it's difficult to know all the different ways we can impact animals with sound. In the absence of this exact knowledge, we are really best off to be as precautionary as we can and try to reduce the sound as much as we can. That's really what the aim with a short note was that we wrote, to just make that point that even if we don't know the whole picture and how a sound impacts the population and the trajectory of different populations, even if we don't have the full understanding of that, what can we do in order to reduce the noise as much as possible at the source, even in the absence of it?
That makes sense. So you have all of this data worldwide, right? Like, you've written a lot of papers about, acoustics and underwater, and inevitably you have to have some anthropogenic human-made noise in with your studies. You can't possibly just study animals, because there's always boats around, or always some human activity around, unless you're in super remote areas. So kind of what your paper was highlighting was that even if we don't have necessarily the exact data for this area, for a specific area of what the acoustic soundscape should be or could be, we know enough to know that we impact it and that care should be taken for making noise.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, for a lot of areas, we don't fully understand, or we're missing the baseline data. Basically, we don't fully understand how many animals live there, when they are there, how they use the area. So is it an important feeding area? Is it an area where animals come to breed? Is it an important area for social activities? For wide areas in the oceans, we just don't have that information. We might know what species might occur, but we might not know the detail of how many there are, or what the species composition really is in an area. And so what we were calling for is just to be precautionary in the absence of really good data, which for some areas we have more data. Obviously, there's areas where there's more effort, where we have time series, long-term data, where we can make better assessment before we start an activity. But then there's other areas where we don't have that information, and so we need to be careful with any activity that we are planning to avoid impact, even if we don't fully understand yet what that impact might be.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Right now, you're conducting your research with Scottish Association for Marine Science. Do you just call it SAMS? Okay.
It's just SAMS, yeah.
Just SAMS. And you just got back from some field time collecting your receivers. What information are you hoping to collect or gain from your recent deployment of acoustic receivers?
Yeah, so the recent deployment was very exciting for us. Yeah, so just coming back really to your previous question, we were given some funding from the Scottish government to deploy acoustic recorders in an area where we know very little about the species distribution, and that's on the outside of the Western Isles on the west coast of Scotland, the Outer Hebrides. It's quite a remote region in Scotland. Not that much work has been carried out there. So it was very exciting for us to be able to put out 10 acoustic recorders last September to learn more about the different marine mammal species that frequent the area, how often they are there, what species we find, and look at the human sounds that are present in the area. So it's really fairly offshore, or an area that hasn't been explored very much so far in terms of marine mammal presence, just because it's quite offshore and difficult to get to, and the weather is often quite bad. So visual surveys are difficult to conduct in those often harsh environments. And what acoustics can also bring, which we can't obtain from visual surveys, is that we can be out in the winter time, of course, when the weather is really bad, when we can't really be out, or nobody really wants to be out on ships getting seasick. So acoustics really open our ears and eyes for those winter periods where we traditionally lack data on marine mammal distribution.
Yeah.
So that will be very exciting to see what we find there.
Yeah. What animals are you expecting to find there?
So we'll probably find porpoises, but we don't really know. So there's a big marine protected areas for harbor porpoises on the inside of these islands, so between the Scottish mainland and the Outer Hebrides. We know that's a preferred habitat for harbor porpoises, but we don't really know how they use the area outside of this, what is now a marine protected area since a couple of years. So it will be interesting to see how much time porpoises spend in those more offshore areas. Find a range of dolphin species, bottlenose dolphins, white-beaked dolphins, common dolphins probably. And the closer we get to the deeper areas, the more we are expecting to find baleen whales, such as humpback whales or minke whales that are migrating along the shelf edge, where the waters are becoming falling steeper, and where it gets deep, basically. We're expecting to find sperm whales, potentially beaked whale species, which are really deep divers that we know very little about, and we'll see.
Very cool. When you're deploying these, what does a deployment look like? You mentioned, it's a hydrophone, it's an underwater microphone. Are you just like attaching it to a brick and sending it overboard and saying, I hope it lands where I want it to? Like, how do you do this?
Yeah, pretty much. We use a big weight. Often they are big chain links, really just, big weights. So they're around this, for this environment, we used around 100 kilograms of weight for each mooring. And then we have what we call acoustic release mechanisms. So it's basically a very smart little device which is attached to the mooring. It's basically also an underwater microphone that we can communicate with. So we can play a signal to it, and it's like a Morse code that the device picks up. And once it hears the signal that we are sending to it, it opens a mechanism that detaches the weight from the rest of the mooring. And because we also attach some floats to it, and the device is positively buoyant, or the acoustic recorder is positively buoyant, that comes up to the surface, and where we can then collect it. So it's basically just a line with all that equipment on it that just sits on the bottom of the ocean. And the beauty of it is that we don't have to have a line that goes all the way up to the surface, so we don't create a risk of whales to get entangled, for example. But the device really just sits just a few meters over the ocean floor and records.
Very cool. You've had other projects that study marine renewable energy and aquaculture. Could you describe these projects a little bit?
Yeah, so I came to Scotland a few years ago, and since I've been here, I've been involved on, as you say, projects that are related to marine renewable energy and also to aquaculture. So when it comes to marine renewable energy, what we're interested in, or what I've been studying in recent years, was the underwater noise related to these projects. So there's two phases of marine renewables that are interesting in terms of underwater noise. That's the construction of an offshore wind farm, for example, where the wind farms have to be driven into the bottom of the sea. So that's a process called pile driving, to bring the turbine foundation into the bottom of the sea. So that's an activity that can be quite noisy, and so we are studying in our group and other groups across Europe and elsewhere, studying the impact that activity of the construction of such a wind farm has on the animals that live in the area. And that involves measuring the source of the sound. So how loud is, the piling of one turbine or an array of turbines as it continues over time.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other aspect of the work is to see how do the animals react to it. So typically their loud construction activities like that might disturb animals. They might leave an area for a period of time, but then they might come back after the construction is finished. And so we're using underwater sound also to describe that process, that behavioral reaction of animals to this activity, and also afterwards to look at how quickly do animals come back, and do they come back, and how do we change the environment by such activities. So that's what we look at in terms of and try to understand better in terms of marine renewable energy projects. We've also been working on tidal energy projects. So tidal energy involves basically an inverse wind turbine. So you have the blades of a turbine underwater that are moving. And of course, if you put these in the way of animals, the question is, can they detect them, or might they swim into them? Is there a risk of collision for the animals? So that's something we were trying to assess for a tidal energy project in the north of Scotland. What we were doing was to assess how loud the turbine is as it is operating, to see at what distance a marine mammal like a seal or a dolphin would be able to detect the turbine and then make the decision to avoid it.
Yeah. So what are you finding with these construction projects, these marine renewable energy resources?
It really depends which phase you're looking at. So for offshore wind farms, the most impactful activity is the construction, if it's fixed turbines. And what the research to date shows is that marine mammals such as harbor porpoises do get disturbed by such projects. They leave the area, but once the construction is over and the wind farm is operating, it's actually not creating a lot of underwater noise, and animals do come back to the areas as well by the looks of it, because there's also benefits that these new constructions might provide. So the base of underwater turbines, for example, might create artificial reefs where fish can accumulate and thrive and create foraging opportunities for marine mammals. So there might also be benefits in the longer term. And in the case of tidal turbines, it seems that animals like seals are avoiding turbines and avoid collisions, basically. This is what was found in that area.
Okay. So construction, not great. Everybody leaves, but after construction and we're getting the use out of these renewable resources, the animals are coming back and they're able to avoid it, and it doesn't seem so far to be causing that much of a long-term disturbance. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was found, but of course you always have to look project by project, and
Right.
what is true for one area and one particular species might not be true for the next one. So therefore we're still learning, and we have, because of the fact that there's been quite a lot of these projects being developed in the North Sea region, where there's more the main species that occurs there, or the main marine mammal species are harbor porpoises. We know quite a lot about how they react to construction and the operation of these offshore wind farms, but we know much less for other species, or what the situation would be in deeper waters or different areas. So there's really still a lot to learn. You're not always able or have to be careful with, taking the results from one area and one species and transferring it directly to another, because the situation could be completely different. And that's the same is true for tidal energy arrays, and especially in the case of tidal energy, we are really just because it's such a young industry, there's only a few demonstration projects that are currently deployed, so we know how animals might react around one turbine. But what happens if these arrays of turbines are being scaled out and we suddenly have 40 or 50 of these devices in an area, and how that affects animals and their prey and their distribution in the long term? That's something that we are still actively studying and need to know much more about. And some of it we can model, but a lot of things we still need data for.
Right. That makes sense. That, I feel like not many things are one size fits all. Just because it works okay in this area for these animals doesn't mean that it's the same in other places. And just because, one or two turbines work doesn't mean like a whole array that would power a whole city would actually work. And like in theory, I really like the concept of tidal power because it's really consistent, right? Like wind can come and go, but tides are like clockwork. But when you submerge things in the water, you're really putting a lot into an ecosystem that, even if it's super well studied, it's still a natural ecosystem. And so things don't play by our rules. And just because we think it looks one way doesn't mean it'll stay that way. So it's really important work that you're doing. And I thank you for kind of looking into that and doing what you do. It's awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
So one of my new favorite questions to ask on the show is, if you had a blank check for unlimited amounts of money, what project would you want to do?
Oh, that's a difficult question. Well, as I said, one thing that we are missing a lot is the baseline, or what we are finding difficult to define is, what are the long-term human impacts on animals. And I feel what we are really missing in many places around the world is the consistent long-term monitoring projects. So I talked in the very beginning about my first volunteering experience at Orca Lab. That's a project that's been running for 3 decades now, but basically on a shoestring, funded through donations and people volunteering their time, and really the dedication of the people who live there and made this project happen. And I think what I would invest in if I did have lots of money is to really keep a project like this going and well funded, because very often when we try to assess projects like these new marine renewable projects that go in many different places, even in places where we think we do have a lot of data, like the North Sea region where we work, we really are missing the long time series. So we have nothing to compare the data that we're collecting when we're putting these devices in the water against. So it's difficult to say what the impact really is if you don't know what was there before. And so I think the collection of long-term data is what I would invest in. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just long-term acoustic recording, and also in areas where we typically don't record. So the offshore areas, I mentioned the acoustic array that we just deployed on the outside of the Outer Hebrides. We really would like to go even deeper and see what's out there when we go off the continental shelf into the deep ocean. There's virtually, well, I shouldn't say nothing, but there's very little known about how animals use different areas. Yet we do reach, with seismic surveys for oil and gas exploration, or more and more with marine renewable projects, and also with our shipping traffic. We really reach and impact these areas, but we know very little about how important they are for animals and how they use them. Yeah, more effort in these offshore areas and long-term efforts. That's what I would invest in.
I like it. I talk a lot about long-term data sets. They're just so important. I mean, it's important to collect any data that you can, especially for, areas that we're going to impact very heavily. But like long-term data sets can really tell such a better picture. And, 3 decades is a substantial data set. So that's really impressive. I like that.
Mhm.
My personal very favorite question to ask on the show is, what is your favorite field story or stories to tell? And this could just be a day out in the field where everything went right and it was just absolutely amazing. Or it could be a day where things happened and it just makes a really great story now.
Oh, there's lots of experiences. One that just springs into my mind just because it's the 13th of September, and I was thinking about that we're recording today, and going back to my first experience at Orca Lab, I was thinking about September 11th 2001. I was actually at Orca Lab when the attacks happened 20 years ago now, and I remember that we were in this remote little place. I think we heard about September 11th through, I think we had a little bit of internet, but not much yet. Mm-hmm. So we got the messages a little bit delayed, and but I remember the impact it still had on us. Yet we were in this really beautiful, very remote place, and I remember us all trying to get our heads around what happened, and in a place that seemed so far away from us, being out there studying those wild animals. And we were all getting onto a boat and just went out and sat in silence on the water there. So that's something that just I was just thinking about a few days ago, that was really impactful to the serenity and beauty of this place. And the silence were in contrast to what was going on in much of the rest of the world. So
yeah, field work can be like that. It separates you from the rest of it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I definitely did in that moment, and I was very grateful afterwards to have been where I was at the time. Mm-hmm. But maybe on a more happy note, I did probably one of the experiences that was very impactful for me was to see my first blue whale, which I was lucky enough to see on a research expedition that I went on a couple of years ago in Antarctica. I was doing aerial surveys for marine mammals from a German icebreaker, and we were basically doing the ship had a helicopter which we used as a platform to survey marine mammal distribution around the ship and the remote places in Antarctica that we were going to. And we had seen quite a few species on this trip, as you would imagine. It's a very rich area. Used by a lot of different species, whether it's humpback whales or orcas, but blue whales are still quite rare after whaling. There's not that many of them around, and we got lucky enough on one of our flights. We were just about getting back to the ship, ready to land, and my colleague suddenly just saw this enormous blow in front of us, and we all saw it, and we all knew this can't be anything else but a blue whale, because it's just the blow that they create, because they're such big animals, is so different from all the other species. So we went over, we kind of aborted our landing process and went over and investigated, and to see a blue whale from the air, that was really, really special.
Yeah, that's incredible.
They can be up to 25 to 30 meters long, and so it's just a very impressive animal to see, especially if you get the chance to see it from above and see this calm, gentle movements with which they navigate their world.
Oh, that is so cool. It's on my list. So for listeners, blue whales are the biggest animal on Earth. They're bigger than dinosaurs. They're huge. And that would be amazing to see that. And I love that you saw it from the air. So it's not just like a random, spout and like maybe like a head or a fluke every now and again. Like from the air, you could really get above it and see the whole animal. That is so cool.
Yeah, exactly. You really get a feel for how big it is. And we actually had to ask the pilot to go up quite a few meters up in height, which you obviously, when you're in a helicopter, you've got the ability to do that, just because our telephoto lenses were too big to get the whole animal into view, whereas for all the other species, if anything, we wanted to go down,
Right.
but for the blue whales, because they're just so enormous, we had to go up in height in order to photograph them. So a very, very special experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is very cool. Thank you for sharing that. At the end of each episode, I like to leave the audience with a conservation ask to go forth and bring into the world. What would you like my audience to take away from your episode?
So I think that because of my research topic and my fascination with sounds, underwater sounds, I think we can all learn a lot from being quiet once in a while and listen more. And I think the pandemic and the periods of lockdowns that we've all experienced over the last year or so really, I think, already brought that home to a lot of people, that just the changes that we've been experiencing once everything became quiet and we stopped for a little bit and really to listen to what is there. If we all did that and thinking about the benefits that brings to us, the slowing down, but also to the rest of nature, that a lot of it we're constantly impacting with all the sounds that we are creating, whether it's from ships or from any of the activities that we are doing. And I think we could all benefit from stopping and listening to the world a little bit more. So there's various ways how one can listen underwater. Even if you don't have specialized equipment, there's relatively cheap underwater microphones that are available now that you could get and use to listen and record when you are out on a kayak or a rowing boat, or if you're sailing. And I just encourage people to do that and see what they can hear and just appreciate what is around us.
Very cool. Are there citizen science efforts for acoustics?
There's quite a few projects that are popping up around the world in the terrestrial world to listen to birds remotely or to bat species. There's not so much yet in terms of listening to underwater environments, but there's the technology is becoming cheaper and cheaper, and I think over the next couple of years we'll be seeing more citizen science projects also using underwater acoustics. But there's a whole range of projects one can get involved in to study marine mammals, visual observations from shore or from boats. There's different projects that people can involved in, and there's more and more apps that allow you to record sightings that you have, and then all of that gets collected in a big database and really helps us to learn more about the distribution of different species. So.
Very cool. If listeners want to find you, connect with you, learn more about you and your work, where's the best place to do so?
Probably the website of my institute.
I'll put a link to it in the show notes.
Or just by email. I'm also on Twitter on Denise Risch, @denrisch is my Twitter handle. Or just send me an email and get in touch.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. I thank you for the work that you're doing for our oceans. I really enjoyed our chat.
Thank you. Yeah, me too. Thank you for having me.
Hey, one more thing. Do you want to dive more into the ocean and marine biology? Need a little guidance on ocean conservation? Head on over to marinebio.life/resources. We've got book recommendations, job posting pages, conference suggestions, and ocean-friendly products. All recommendations have been personally vetted by me, and I will continue to add to the collection as I come across cool things to share. Head on over to marinebio.life/resources to learn more. See you over there. Thank you for listening to today's show. I'd love to hear any insight you've gleaned. Leave a comment in the show notes or send me an email over at marinebio.life. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a review and of course, share with your friends. If you want more resources for ocean news, including conservation topics and careers, plus personal insight from me that I just don't share anywhere else, join me at marinebio.life and sign up for email updates. Keep after your dreams and making waves in your community. One person can make a difference. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time on the So You Want to Be a Marine Biologist podcast.